So, what I want to talk to you guys about today is I want to get started on this right away. And those of you who took recording studio fundamentals and also took film scoring last semester, you've sort of heard me allude to some of this stuff, but now we're going to get very specific. And part of this practice and this study is learning how to listen to music in a different way than you're used to listening to music. So what do I mean by that? Well, the first thing is, I have a fair amount of people who are graduate students in this class. I've got some undergraduates who are music majors in this class. And some of you have heard me say this before, but many of you haven't. But when you're a music student and you're studying ear training, what are the two methods? There's really three methods that are used, but two that are formally taught in a classroom. Let's say you're going to Queens College and you're a music major, whether you're music ed, performance, whether you're just a straight music major, whatever you are. There is one class that contains two studies that you take. And does anybody want to venture a guess as to what they are?
Are you talking about sight singing and dictation?
Correct. So sight singing and dictation. So basically, for those of you that aren't music majors, what sight singing is, it's to study how to look at a sheet of music and be able to sing it from sight. You might not be in the right key if you don't have perfect pitch, but you can get it relatively everything accurate. And there are textbooks. I think the one that's used at Queens College was made by my teacher, Professor Berkowitz. And they're still using that, I believe. And dictation is when they'll play something at the piano and you have to write it out onto manuscript paper. So teaching you, that's good. That's good. It's necessary. Another method of ear training that is, I don't know if it's formally taught, but it's often encouraged when you're studying jazz, is transcription, where you are listening to a performance that you like and you're transcribing it. And that could take on the form of you learn how to sing it note for note and then you figure it out on your instrument, or you write it out on manuscript paper and then you learn how to play it on your instrument. And then you extract things from that you might transpose to different keys. Like, let's say there's a couple of lines that you like in particular and phrases, and you might learn how to play those in all 12 keys. And you develop your musical language and you study what the greats are doing. So those are typical. But there's other ways of listening to music. And what I want to teach you now, or expose you to now, is that every sound you hear is made up of multiple parts, multiple frequencies sounding all simultaneously, creating up an aggregate sound. And this occurs on multiple levels. So if you're listening to a solo instrument that's just playing one note, you can hear many pitches if you learn how to listen in that one note. Once you start becoming aware of that relationship between all those different notes that are contained in each pitch, you start being able to, you get more sensitive to that. That translates into what we're studying here, sequencing, because when you start to mix music, which you're going to be doing like now, right, with this assignment, you start to listen to first the relative volume between instruments. And I sort of gave you that on your assignment feedback, where I was telling you to voice the melody a little bit louder than some of the other parts. That's mixing. And from my perspective, a lot of mixing has to do with volume, right? And I don't just mean volume in terms of how loud an instrument is in the aggregate of everything you're listening to. But even if you're treating the sound, if you're adding EQ, EQ is a frequency-dependent volume control. You're controlling the volume of certain frequencies, and as musicians, so like if you're an engineer, you would be thinking in terms of hertz or kilohertz or actual frequencies. As musicians, it might be easier for us to think in terms of harmonics and overtones, because that's sort of what we're more used to as musicians. Compression is an automatic volume control, right? So a lot of panning, is a volume. Something is louder on the left than it is on the right on the soundstage. So a lot of mixing has to do with volume. And so to start to get to listen into a sound and to be able to tell all the components of a sound. So there is one particular kind of sound, though, that is only one pure tone. Does anybody know what that is or what it's called?
Sine wave?
Correct. Who said that? Was that Kevin?
Yeah.
Yes, and correct, Mark. Very good. That being said, I've yet to come across a pure sine wave with no overtones. Even the sine wave generator in Pro Tools does not pump out a pure sine wave. So one way of me teaching this to you is, or exposing this to you, is to use, yes, Paul, thank you, is to use something where I can that generates sine waves, where I can control the volume, the level, or even the presence of other pitches. So there's a series of notes that are based upon physics that every natural occurring sound has. They're called the overtone series. Okay? So basically, and you could make the case that tonality developed out of the overtone series. And next week, as a reinforcement of this lesson, next week I'm going to play a video where Leonard Bernstein shows it in like incredible detail. So we'll get to that next week. But for right now, I'm just going to talk about it. So the overtone series is the actual bass note. And I don't mean bass like bass guitar. I mean bass like the foundational note, like a bass of a building, B-A-S-E instead of B-A-S-S. But the bass note of a sound is called the fundamental. And then there are a series of notes above that that are mathematically calculated, that occur in nature, physics. And those are called partials, P-A-R-T-I-A-L-S. So does anybody have any guess as to what the first partial is? Some of you might know this already.
Octave.
Correct, octave. Yes, Richard, that is a partial, but not yet. Right, so the octave. So if I were to play a note, hold on a second. Let me turn that up so you can hear it better. Right? The first overtone would be this, an octave higher, the same pitch an octave higher. And then the next overtone after that would be a fifth, then an octave, and then it goes up in series after that, third. And a very popular instrument that you could consider to possibly be the first synthesizer is the Hammond organ, right? It's an electronic instrument that creates its sound through something called additive synthesis. And what do I mean by additive synthesis? Well, you take a tone and you add other tones on top of it to create your sound. That's different than a vast majority of the synthesis that you hear from keyboard synthesizers, which is called subtractive synthesis, where you have a waveform that's harmonically rich and you use filters to shave off some of those overtones to create your sound. There are other kinds of synthesis that are like wavetable synthesis and FM synthesis. Those are also synthesis, but the most often used synthesis, and for all these keyboard synthesizers I've got here, yeah, they're all subtractive. I'm just looking around. Yeah, they're all subtractive synthesis. I do have an FM synthesizer, but okay. So the Hammond organ is an additive synthesizer. So right here on the screen, we have the one that comes with Pro Tools. You know, I would grade this as a plugin, like a B. And if you work on the sound, you can get it up to a B+. It's not the greatest, but it works perfectly well for what I'm just going to demonstrate here. So what I've done with this is I've set this up to be the purest sound possible. All right, let me actually hide this for a second. So right here, these are the only controls we're going to concern ourselves with, which are these right here. All right. These are called drawbars. They're actual, I don't know how many of you have played an organ, but they're actual bars that you pull out, and the further out they are, the louder the sound. And they each, and they're detented. In other words, they click out for each number. So they're not like a perfectly sliding like this controller here. These slide. Whoops. These slide perfectly smoothly. The ones in the Hammond organ, they click, right? And they've got 8 positions. Right, so this is off, so that's at 0, and then when you pull it all the way out, it's at 8. And there's some small numbers here. And when you pull out the different combinations of these drawbars, that's called, oh, sorry, hold on a second, my fault. Okay, so when you pull out these drawbars right here,
you have to switch back.
Sorry, I pushed the wrong button, thank you. If I'm not paying attention to this guy over here, I push this button instead of this button here. So it's like, all right. So let me put myself back in here. So this is the drawbar, right? So you push it in, it's at 0. You pull it out, all the way out, it's at 8. And the further out it is, the louder that frequency is. All right. So it's like a mixer almost. So when this is all the way out and I play this note, let me make that even louder. Give me 1 second here. There we go. Yeah, 8 clicks. 8 positions, Mark. Correct. 0, right? So now I'm going to push this in and you'll hear that volume get softer. And now it's off. Now, if you notice here, there are 3 colors for the rest of these drawbars. The 2 brown ones are subharmonics, which we'll talk about in a minute. But going to the from the here to the right, these are the harmonics, and the white ones, right? Now it's too loud. So these are all different octaves. So in other words, I'm playing the same, I'm playing one note, right? I'm going to hold that note down. And these are all the different octaves. This is the 5th, an octave and a 5th. octave and a third, right? That's another fifth. And then when you pull these out, you create what are called registrations. So what's really cool about this is that, okay, so I'm playing one note right now, and I can make a major triad. Right, so everybody can hear those three pitches in there? So, in other words, if I turn those off, right, that's what's sounding. And those are overtones. So, now, what's interesting is that now I'm playing this note, and this note right here is also sounding. But if I play two notes, right, I'm getting a different kind of a chord. If I play these two notes, if I play an A and a C sharp, you can see that by changing the registration, the sound starts to become a little discordant. Right? That's not a pleasant sound. It's not a pleasant sound at all, right? So, and I'm playing just a little major third, which is a very consonant interval, right? That sounds pretty. It's nice. But once I start bringing those other overtones in, it takes on a different characteristic. So let's take a look at that here. Okay, so this is a frequency analyzer, and from left to right, so anything that you see on the graph that's over in this area is a very low frequency, and then as you go to the right, the frequencies get higher. Everything on the bottom, towards the bottom, is softer, and as it goes up to the top, it's louder. So if I were to close this down to just play my one note, you could see that this has a very strong fundamental right here, and then there are a couple of a little bit louder sounds here. So this is at 440, right, and then this is at 880. So these are an octave above and then 2 octaves above. They're very soft, but that's pretty pure, right? So as I start bringing out the fifth, an octave and a fifth, you're going to see more activity up in this area here. See that? And if I bring this third in, you see that? Now, interestingly, right? The higher the overtones, when I got up into this registrations over here, right? The higher they are, the less volume I need for them to be heard. Do you see how this is only out at like 1? This is all the way out, the lowest one. So that's something to be aware of, is that very high frequencies can cut through very easily. It's so if you've ever stood in front of a piccolo while the person is playing it, it can hurt your ears. A little piccolo, it can cut through a 100-piece orchestra if they're playing up in their, you know, the register of the piccolo that it really speaks in. So high frequencies can really cut through and be really biting. So you just have to be careful with that. So, how do you use this? Well, what's an example of an instrument that has more of a pure sound? An acoustic instrument. A flute, right? What woodwind instrument has a really, would you say, an overtone rich sound? Bassoon, correct. Oboe, correct. English horn. Double reed instruments, very buzzy, right? Saxophone, very buzzy, like instruments that have a lot of buzz to them. Yeah, it's okay, Paul. I don't use it when I mix. I have something on my desktop that I use that's better. But it's okay. If you know how to use it, it's helpful. If you don't know how to use it, it's not helpful. It's helpful for checking things out, Paul. Things have to sound good. You have to have a nice space to mix in. All that stuff's important. Okay, so how do you work that? So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be orchestrating the piece that we put onto two parts, right? So how do we use this to inform our orchestration? So let me play something here with this nice little pretty sound. Hold on a second. Give me 1 second. Let me get my foot on the volume pedal. Right? That's very sweet. Watch what happens when I start bringing in some of these partials here. Right? It has a different quality to it. So that if you're doing things that have a very, like eventually you're doing stuff, right? So I'm playing. That works with this registration, but with this registration, it's very distorted and it's very harsh listening to it, So your combination of instruments affect the way that you voice chords, affects the way that you present things. All right. So that's the first thing I wanted to introduce you to. And next week, I'm going to play you a little video from Leonard Bernstein to reinforce this. All right. So I've got a little something here. And I want to play a game. So I've got the same passage, right? Orchestrated 4 different ways. Got the purple, this reddish color, green, and yellow. Okay, so let's take a listen to the first one. Let me turn that up a little bit. Is that soft, or can everybody hear that? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Okay.
Could be a little louder.
Okay. All right, so how many instruments is that playing right now? One more time. It's a solo flute, all right? And I think it might be an alto flute. I did this a couple of years ago, so I don't remember exactly whether it's an alto flute or a regular flute, but it's a flute instrument, all right? Let's listen to the second example. One more time. How many instruments there? And can anybody venture a guess besides Mark? Paul? No, Pedro. It's 2 instruments for sure. Yep. So Paul and Mark and Chris, good job. Yes, it's flute and oboe, or as my composition teacher, Professor Musgrave, used to call it, a flobo. Good. But let's take a look at, let's do something here. Let me do one thing here that might be interesting. All right, so I'm going to play the first one, and then I'll play the second one. And let's look at this frequency graph, and let's see what we've got. All right, so the difference between the two is that when the oboe is playing, in this area here, there's a lot more activity going on. All right? So there's more overtones being produced by the oboe. Now, I've got those blended so that they sound like one instrument, like they're so tightly blended that they sort of fit together as if they were one instrument. You know what I mean? Instead of, the oboe being so loud that it dominates the flute, or the flute so loud that it dominates the oboe. I've got them blended well so that they sound sort of together. All right, let me hide this for a sec, and let's look at our next one. Whoops. One more time. So, okay, it's 3 instruments, right? It's flute and oboe, and then I believe it's a high bassoon playing in there. But it's definitely 3 instruments and in octaves, right? Bassoon underneath in octaves, right? The bassoon is an octave lower, so we've spread out the orchestration a little bit. And let's see how that affects our perception of the sound here. Right, much more activity. And now, right, and this last one with the low note is doubled, I believe. And you can really hear it punching out over here. This is 4 instruments. So the same phrase, orchestrated 4 ways, and each way has a different sound and a different feel. All right? Okay. Let's move on. Now, there's another aspect to making sounds blend, and that is where they sit in a room or in a physical space. How close to you you're perceiving them to be and how far away that you're perceiving them to be. Now, it's all an illusion, right? Because I don't have 25 speakers around my head making a perfect circle and then above me and below me, like making a sphere where I can hear all the sounds. Stereo gives the illusion of creating depth, closeness, close to back, right? So let's take a listen. I think it'll be a little bit more apparent. Let me turn these up like I did the other ones. Right? So that is an example of something that's close mic'd. It sounds like the microphones are like, this far away from the instrument. You can hear at the end, after the sound is over, you can hear a little bit of reverb tail from the room, but it's very close. Let's listen to the second example. So that's an example of something that's mic'd with a series of mics above the conductor. Like if this was done in an orchestra, there'd be a series of mics above the conductor's head called a tree. It's 3 microphones. If you take Audio Midi 2, I explain that in pretty good depth, but it's basically just a series of microphones right above where the conductor is. And it's, good 10 feet away from the instruments, right? Can you change the proximity feel through increased volume? I guess you can. I'm not quite sure about that because I guess if something's really loud, it sounds like it's close. It's more dominant in the mix, but it's not. I don't know if it feels like it's any closer to you. So with this example, as the phrase is going on, you can start to hear that when they stop playing one note, the sound of that lingers for another second while the next note plays, so that there's an acoustic overlap of sound being created by the room you're in. So in other words, the room that you're in creates additional music. What do I mean by that? So like you're in a small, tight space, like a practice room at Queens College, right? It's got a sound to it, but it's a very small little room. Let's say that I'm in this room here. I've got acoustic treatment all over the place. This room is fairly dead. When the sound is over, it's pretty over. If you go into the atrium at Queens College, which has a 4-second reverb time, right? The atrium in the music department. Everybody's been in there, right? Pretty much. I mean, it hasn't been that long since we've been in the building. Almost a year coming up next week, in 2 weeks. I think it's been a year since they closed in-person classes down. Oh, you've never been in the building, Kevin. Well, you're missing it. It's too bad you weren't in Rathouse Hall, where the airplanes would shake the turntables so much that the records would skip, the airplanes from LaGuardia. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Okay, So if you're in the atrium, it's got this huge reverb sound. So you could be talking, you could finish talking, and your sound is still playing for another couple of seconds, so that you finish and you're on to your next idea. The previous idea is still playing, right, in the reverb of the room. So the reverb created in a large space creates additional music. So you really have to start thinking about that when you're mixing and how things fit in, because there are times when you want that and there are times when you don't want that. And that's just being aware of it is the first step in learning how to use it. So let's take a listen to the last one, and then we'll listen to all three, one after the other. Right, so that one, the room actually sounds almost as loud as the actual instruments. You know, the tones that are happening afterwards. They almost sound as loud as the instrument, because that's what they call ambient mics. So they're pretty far away. And they might be like 15 feet away or 15 yards away, or meters or something like that from the players, right? So there's another way for me to show this that I just thought of. Let me try this. All right, so this is a chamber strings patch sample library. This is Contact, it's called. What's great about this is that they've got 3 mic positions: close, tree, and ambient. And this is a little mixer. So if I play something with this spiccato sound, oh. Give me 1 second. Technical issues. My keyboard's not working. All right, let's do this. Oh, I know why it's not doing it. Okay. Did my screen freeze on you guys?
Yeah.
But you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let me try something here. All right, give me 1 second. If something happens, just wait a minute and sign back on, all right? You can still hear me, right? Hey, check 1, 2.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so you could see me now? All right.
Yes.
Last semester it took me 10 minutes to figure that out, what happens. Okay, so this is a sample library. And like I said, it's just a chamber string ensemble. It's mapped out throughout the whole keyboard. And I've got it set to a spiccato sound, which is just bouncing on the bow. So it's a short sound. And I've got the close mic set up. So I'm going to play a couple of chords and leave some space between each one. Right, so you can hear a little bit of sound after I let go, right? That's the reverb from the room. Now, if I add the tree mic in, you're going to hear more of that reverb. You hear how much louder the reverb is? And if I go to the ambient mic, right, the reverb is almost as loud as the actual sound. So let's do this. Right, you can hear the difference as I went through all the different mic positions. So based upon this, what I would say to answer Andrew's question is the volume of the room. Right. Al. The volume of the room determines how close it sounds to you. Right? So, because when I'm playing these close mic sounds, that sounds pretty close to you physically. You know, like you're almost right there. And then if I go to the ambient one, the sound of the room is what's really loud. And this direct sound of the violin section or string section is not as loud. The proportion between the two has changed. Okay. Introduction. We'll be going over this more in the future. That's just an introduction. Any questions on this? I know that my friend Ken is watching and he's probably rolling his eyes. He's an engineer who's auditing the class. Okay, so there's something else on this session, but I want to get into that next week. Let me close this. All right, so we're going to go over some more MIDI editing right now, and I'm going to introduce a couple of new concepts, and then I'm going to work a little bit with with Bartok, and I'm going to show you how I want you to work as far as going forward with your orchestration. So I've got a really sloppily played track here, right? All right. So it's just drums, bass, piano, and strings. So I want to edit my drums. Let me reposition my camera. There we go. All right. So I want to reposition my drums. So I want to edit my drums a little bit. And I want to introduce a couple of new concepts to you this week. So the first couple of weeks of working on this, I had you doing everything manually. And the reason I had you doing that was because you need to have those mouse skills and you need to understand what it is that you're doing. And doing things manually gives you that experience. But there are other ways with which to edit notes and velocities. And we're going to start to introduce some of those techniques right now. So I've got my drums right here. I'm going to open up my MIDI editor and let's make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to select my drums. Okay, so you guys have been seeing your drums let me make this even bigger. Like this. Now, this isn't really going to affect the drums so much, but you see how these notes are all really long? It doesn't really matter because they're very sharp and they decay very quickly, so it doesn't matter how long they are. But let's say I wanted to change them all and make them all the same duration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click over the keyboard. And you notice when I hover over a note, the key actually turns color. I'm going to click and drag down. And so I've selected just this, which is the kick drum, and that, which is the cross stick. All right? And then Option P, the letter P like Pete, right? We've got our event operations window. Option P. If you forget what the key command is, you go to the event and you go to time operations and you go to time operations window. Well, I'm sorry. Excuse me. You go to event operations, and the event operations window. So let's take a look at the event operations window. So each one of these guys here is an event. It's a MIDI event, right? And as I said last week, it's got several parameters to it. It's got a pitch, it's got a duration, and it's got a velocity. And it's got a spot on the timeline that it lives in. So those are 4 characteristics, 4 of each event. So the event operations window is this rectangle with all of these controls. And right here, you can select what operation you want to transform. Yes, that's correct, Mark. So here you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 that you can 9 event operations that you can alter. There are key commands to access the other ones, and I'm going to show you one more key command in a minute. So right now we're change duration. Make sure that none of these are selected, just the top one. And we're going to set them all to, this is the number of beats here, and this is the number of ticks. So if I wanted to make them all an eighth note, and some of you weren't here last week for the explanation of ticks, I posted a video on our Google Classroom timeline that you can watch where I go into very detailed explanation of ticks. I spent like 45 minutes explaining it, and I think it'd be very helpful. But for right now, all you have to know is that an eighth note is equal to 480 ticks, and a 16th note is equal to 240 ticks. So that means in each beat, there are 2 eighth notes, one that starts at 0 and one that starts at 480, and 4 16th notes, 0, 240, 480, and 720. And on our timeline, they are these 3 numbers up here on the counter. So if I put up the big counter, big, it's huge, right? Bars, beats, and ticks. So if this was at 480, that would be the second eighth note of beat one in measure 1. If it was 720, it would be the 4th 16th note of beat 1 measure 1. And if it was at 0, that's just beat 1. If it's here, that's beat 2. This is measure 5, beat 3, the second 16th note. As far as this goes, though, we want to make all of these be a 16th note. So that'd be 240. All right, hit enter. We got to select all these guys. And notice that the apply button becomes active. It's not blue, it's gray. And if you click on this, watch what happens to all these notes. Boom. Just like that, like magic. They change into the same duration. And you could do the same thing with these guys here. Let's say you wanted to make these also 240. Now, there's a lot of functionality here. Gee, this is like all this. I haven't opened this yet in my new computer. I haven't opened this window yet, so it's coming up kind of unusual. But I don't know if it's just me. Right, so you're going to probably have to watch it on YouTube. All right, that's all I can say. I've got this. I've got the resolution set pretty high, to the highest thing on the computer here. But basically, this first line here says set all to, and then you've got beats here and ticks here. All right, I can't resize this window, unfortunately. All right. All right. So let me solo the drums. Also, let me turn that click off. All right, so I'm listening to the drums right now, and I can tell right now that the hi-hats are too loud. The kick drum and the cross stick are too soft. So if we did what we did last week, I'd have you holding down the command key and, changing your velocity this way. But there's another way that you can work on your velocity. Well, there's a couple of ways to work on your velocity. There's a way to do it in the event operations window, but we're not going to go there. I want to show you something called edit lanes. So right here, there is an arrow that points that way. If you click on it, it opens up something called the editing lane, right? And this can be moved around. Whoops. And it can be resized either by clicking on that gray bottom of that gray area and dragging, or if you click here, you can change the size of it. So if you notice, for every note, there are these little bars here with little diamonds at the end of them. That is the value of the velocity. Now, if you open yours up and it doesn't say velocity, there's a little box here that you click, and it's got all of these parameters that you can change. You can get incredibly deep in here. But this is velocity. So these are all called Midi CC values. Now, people can call that today, in today's world, they call that continuous controllers, right? But actually, when the MIDI spec was invented, it was control change. So I'm going to be showing you quite a bit of work in this edit lane using some of the other parameters. But for today, we're just going to work on velocity. So if I click here, I could see all my hi-hats are now selected. You see that the diamonds are all white. That means that they're activated. And I can just click and drag all those down to lower the velocity of all. Okay? So let me do that again. I'm going to click here on this C sharp, and it's going to select all of my hi-hats, which are all the same pitch. These become illuminated, or white, instead of the color of the track. And I can click, right? I'm just clicking with my mouse and dragging down, and that's lowering all of those. And notice, now that I've lowered the volume of the hi-hats, the kick drum and the cross stick are at a good volume. So that's something that I want you to start getting in the habit of, is if you can't hear something, instead of turning it up, think, is there something else that's too loud that's blocking it? So that you get into subtractive mixing rather than adding more and more volume. It's just easy, and it's the first thing to do is to turn the volume up, and that's not always the right choice. Now, let's say I wanted to so let's say I've got these here, right? And I wanted to make the velocity crescendo up. Well, what you can do is manually click and drag them up like that. And let me undo all that. But the next thing I want to show you today is the pencil tool, which is this guy over here. And the key command for that is Command and the number 6 gets you there. Right? See how I'm scrolling by holding the Command key and pushing on these numbers here. So if you click on the key on the pencil, right now what I want you to do until you learn and get control of the mouse is I want you to use the line. I don't want you to, we'll get into these other shapes later on in the semester, but right now just click and activate the line. So in other words, I'm clicking and I'm letting go, and that pull down menu comes down, and I'll click on the line. And this means that I can draw a straight line. Notice how the cursor turns to a pencil. So I can click, right, and drag up like that. Let me add another hi-hat in there. Let me just do that. Whoops. Let me just add some hi-hats in there so that we've got more than just a couple. So I move to my pencil tool and click. And I would click a little bit before the note that you want to start moving so that you're sure to grab it, and just sort of making a diagonal up line with my mouse. And then you can just draw in a little crescendo like that, all right?
Crescendo tool.
Yes and no, but that is the general idea. Now, the reason why I want you to, let me just show you why I want you to do the straight line is that because, right, it becomes very easy if you don't know what you're doing with the freehand to make something that's a little odd. So just until, for a couple of weeks or maybe a month, just use the straight line. That would be perfectly fine for our assignments. And then as you get more technique of controlling the mouse and understanding what these things actually all do, you'll be able to control things a lot better. Okay, so let's take a listen to our bass. All right, so now, if we look at the bass, we could tell that I have the 16th note grid selected, and I make sure it's activated. Okay. Let me solo the bass. So if we right here, let me zoom in on this. I'm before the grid, and all these notes are a little early. So I could go through this whole thing, right, and manually fix them. Oh, another aside. So look at this color here I've got selected. Notice how it's hard to see these down here. So I would stay away from some of these brighter colors. There we go. You see how that's much easier to see? Okay, so I had you last 2 weeks, first part of the assignment, I had you manually putting everything on the grid. Now, if you notice that in here, I've got stuff happening. Looks pretty much like I've got some 8th notes happening, no 16th notes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, right, I'm using the grabber tool, and it's just in this edit area, and I'm going to do Command A, and everything is selected. And then the other key command that I want you to remember is Option. Excuse me. Option 0. Option 0. So this is another event operation. So today, do you matter on a server screen? No, Paul. No, I don't. You can use it. You can do that if you like, but I like having everything in one window. I don't like having 15. I have 2 screens. I usually have a film on the second screen. This works perfectly well for me, and most people are using laptops, so I want to teach it this way. You know, there are some people, like when I went to Jeff Rona's house out in Los Angeles, he has a screen that when he works in Logic, he has a screen that's just has his MIDI editor open, and he's got 3 screens. If I had a third screen, I might do that, but I don't have a third screen. I've got 2 screens. Okay, so what we want to quantize, we don't want to quantize the note off, but we want to quantize the note on. That's the starting spot, where it is on the timeline. And very easily, very quickly, I'm going to show you 2 things with this, all right? This is our quantize grid. So what you have to do is find the lowest value of the note. So if you've got a 16th note, you'd set it to a 16th note. If you've got triplets, you would set it to a triplet. And you would click on this. So I'm going to use 16th notes because there might be a 16th note somewhere in here. There's nothing faster than that. And I'm going to zoom in. And you can move this around so you could see what happens right here when I click on apply. See how they all slid over? So they're all right on the grid. So now if I solo the drums and the bass, they're playing together. There's, at the same time. There's a couple of other issues which we'll get to in a minute. But the other thing I'm going to undo that, which is Command Z, and I'm going to do Option 0 again. I don't like perfect gridded music. All right? Unless you're doing techno. You can make things more rhythmically accurate without making them mechanically perfect. And you do that with the options here. And the only one I want to introduce you to today is the strength. And I typically set my strength somewhere, depending upon the piece, around 90%. And let's see what that does. So I'm going to select this note. And my grid is here. I'm going to select this, and I'm going to apply. And you see that it brings it closer, but not right on the grid. If I turn this off, it goes right on the grid. So I'm going to select all, and I'm going to strength at 90, and that will make it closer to being rhythmically perfect, but not mechanical. It'll still maintain some of my timing. Now, yes, correct. You can actually, thank you, Ashley. You can, Kevin, you can make it affect the note end as well, but I didn't have that activated. So right here it has the note off. This becomes very helpful to me when I'm setting something up for notation to import into Sibelius, which is not part of this class, but I can discuss it if other people want to learn it. Okay. A quick aside for all of you that aren't bass players. You'll notice that I've got space in my bass line. Yeah, so not enough space. That needs to be shortened. And what I'm doing is I'm leaving space for the snare drum. right? And I'm just leaving space between some notes. Not everything is all, you know, the same, like one note leads into the next. That's not the way the bass is phrased. We're going to go over bass lines later on in the semester. We're going to go over drum programming later on in the semester. But I just wanted you to just take a quick look at this. Now, just to make a quick statement about that. I'm sorry. Now, as I'm listening to this play, right, and this is something I want you to get used to doing as you're working. I can hear the hi-hat and I can hear the cross stick on the drum. I can't hear the kick drum. Now, your first impulse might be to turn up the kick drum, but I like the balance of the drums where they are. So that means that my bass is too loud. Okay? Now, let me just close this MIDI editor for a minute because this will bring us to a new topic. Now, right here, in this column here, you have your audio output. So you might say, oh, the bass is too loud. I'm going to bring the audio volume down. No, I don't want you doing that. Nope. Not with MIDI instruments. Don't touch this for MIDI instruments. Just trust me. I'm teaching you MIDI right now. Yeah, you can, Paul, but I'd rather get the volumes. Most of the problems are volume. You know, EQing is more of a providence of the second semester of this class than this semester. Most of the problems in mixing have to do with volume, in my opinion. You know, you get the volumes of everything right. You get things panned correctly. You get, you know, and mixing is much, much, much easier. And as you work, you should be mixing as you work, right? So I'm mixing right now as I'm editing this and making this performance better. So we're not going to touch the audio output. We're going to touch MIDI volume. Now, there's two ways to affect MIDI volume. One is through something called MIDI volume, and one is through something called expression. And I typically employ both of them. I use one, excuse me, in my case, I use MIDI expression, which is MIDI CC11, and MIDI volume, which is MIDI CC7. I use expression to do all the detailed work with volume. And then I use my MIDI volume control as, oh, the whole track is too loud. I can bring everything down. So in other words, you know, I might do, and I'm going to show you on the strings, to do crescendos and decrescendos like a string player would if they're putting their bow across the violin. So, but for right now, we're just going to use MIDI volume here. So there's two ways of doing that. You can go right here where it says MIDI volume, click and drag that down. So that's much better. I brought that down to 72. Now, there's a reason why I don't want you to touch this. When we get into audio later on in the semester, you're going to be playing around with this. But I want you to get your gain structure correct, and what's coming out of the MIDI instrument is important. And that's why you're going to deal with MIDI volume. Now, how do you balance the bass and the bass drum? There's two ways of doing it, right? You start off with the bass really soft, and you play it, you close your eyes, and you listen. And I'm bringing the volume up. And look, I have my eyes closed, and I got to the same spot as I did before within one MIDI value, because I know what I'm listening for, right? And you'll get there. So you want it so that the bass is heard, and you could still hear the attack of the kick drum, right? That's the concept that I want you to. There's many ways to mix bass and kick drum, and you know, we'll get into doing a rhythm section track later on in the semester. But just you know, just giving you the basic introduction to some of these concepts. All right, so MIDI volume. Now, let's leave the piano alone because I'm looking at the time here and I want to get to the Bartok. And let's look at the strings, right? So let's do the MIDI editor in the strings. All right, so this is all uneven. So I'm going to make this all even. I'm going to use the pencil tool. And I'm just going to click. And what I like to do with what I'm about to show you, and I'm using the straight line, right? I'm going to go afterwards. After the passage is over, I'm going to click and drag all the way to the right, to the left. And now all my velocities are even. And for this kind of strings, that works well. If you had a more advanced program, we would be talking about something different. But with Expand 2, and this is why I want you to use Expand 2 so that everybody's on the same page, this works well. Now let me show you a little MIDI trick, okay? You see right here, these two notes, this note and this note are the same. And over here, they're the same. What I would, this is another thing to learn, is I would select both of these by clicking and dragging. And what I want to do is I want to make them one note so that there's not two attacks. So it's the key command is Option Shift 3, and it heals that. Right? So Option, Shift, and the number 3. And we do the same thing here. So what you have to realize is that these are samples. They're static sounds. And when you're playing a passage like this that's like legato and chords, you want to make it as smooth as possible. Yeah, Mark, let me see. Some of those work and some of those don't work. Let me just see. Yeah, it works there. There are some functions that only work on this. No, this is not MIDI volume that I did, Kevin. This is velocity.
Okay, because before you were saying that there were two ways to edit the MIDI volume.
I'm going to do that's exactly the next thing I'm going to show you.
Sorry.
All right. So as Kevin would know, since he's an excellent violinist, that violin players don't play everything at the same volume. Notes are animated, right? Right? They're playing the bow and they're increasing the pressure of the bow and they're changing the volume as the bow is going across the string. So obviously, you know, with Expand, there's only so much of that we can do because there's not a lot of samples per each note. But what we can use MIDI volume to approximate that. And this is where I would, you could either use MIDI volume here or you can go down to controllers and use MIDI expression. So let's just keep it easy and use MIDI volume. And notice now, instead of there being individual events, there's a line, a continuous line. And what I could do with my pencil tool is, and I'm going to exaggerate this, all right? And you see how that now doesn't sound so stiff. That's exaggerated. It's not what I'd want to do, but I'm just teaching you. So maybe I'd make it a little bit less on the beginning. And let me bring the bass and drums in so I can hear how that sounds against the bass and the drums. Actually, let's do this. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is come down here because I'm listening to how it phrases with the bass. And then this is bad right here. So I haven't. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna leave. I'll leave that for next week. There's so much information I've been giving you already. Right, and then I would just go through the whole piece and. This is, yeah, so this is changing the MIDI volume, Mark. That's all it's doing. It's like automating the faders of an audio output. It's just doing it with a MIDI volume. So Mark, if we looked here, the strings, you can't see this because of the screen, but this number changes. Right, that's changing right now. Okay, great. But the audio output is not moving. Okay. So that's a lot of information, correct? A lot of good information. We're starting to see how we can transform our MIDI performances into something more musical. We're learning how to quantize using the quantize, and we're going to get into the quantize function more because you could do all sorts of stuff to change the feel. You can quantize something against the feel of another. Let's say I played something. A friend of mine played something really cool on the drums, and I played something MIDI, and I wanted to make it feel like it fit in with the drums if I couldn't play well. I can quantize my piano performance against the drums. I'll show you how to do that. And it just, there's a lot of work to be done with quantizing, but this is the first steps to doing this. MIDI volumes, note durations. So those are the things that we learned this week. And there's one other thing, but we'll get into that when we start working on the bar talk right now. So let me close this out. Oh, Command Z. That's how you undo everything, Andrew. Did you get that, Andrew? I believe it's this one here. Let me just... Oh, before we go on, I'm not going to be ragging on anybody. Okay? But a few of you handed in a .ptx file. Right here. Okay, that doesn't work. I'm able to fix that here, but please, if we went over that, you got to hand in the session folder, not the session file. This goes on, typically it takes people a few weeks to get that. All right, so,
Sir?
yes.
Question about that.
Who's this?
What was due when? Because the one from before didn't have a due date on it.
Right.
But I saw you.
Yeah. So just I wanted to check your progress. So if you hand something in today, I can look at it. I'm not, what I'm assigning today is going to be due next week. All right.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right, but then on the one that I handed in today didn't have the colors in it.
Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. No worries. I'll take a look at your stuff. I didn't have it because of my house situation. I had to put school on the back burner this week, but I did go over everything that was handed in this morning and yesterday. So, all right. So let's. let's take a look at this. All right, so this is Bartok here, and I'm going to do the larger violin duet. And what I've done is I've set up a little template here where I've loaded in sounds, right? And I've just got a little chamber group: flute, oboe, horn, harp, high strings, low string, and some pizzicato strings. You can make whatever kind of ensemble you want. It could be all synthesized sounds. That's your choice. You know, it's your creativity, it's your assignment. I'm doing this just to show how to work. All right, so now I'm trying to think of what the best way to do for this would be. You can just mute these two tracks that they don't sound, all right? Because we don't want the piano sounds to come out, or you can remove the piano plugin. So if you've got, MIDI Grandin on both of those, you could just put no insert, right? So I'm just clicking on the upper left-hand corner. There's a dot, insert selector, and just put no insert, and it disappears. Because you don't want any sound coming out of these two tracks. So I went over this a little bit on the small class we did last week, but I'm going to go over it again. So I'm going to start creating an arrangement of this, and I'm going to show you what I'm doing. So I'm going to select from here to the beginning. And basically what I'm doing is Command C, and I'm going to copy all that. And then I've got my grid set up to a quarter note. Make sure your grid is activated. Some of you didn't have your grid activated. And then I want to start at the beginning, so I'm going to hit the return key. And then I'm going to do something called merge pasting, and I'm going to show you why. So merge pasting is Option and the letter M, like Mary. So that pops in that whole bit that I just copied. Now, if I merge paste, and we look right up in this area here, it says flute. It takes the name of the track. So that saves you time if you merge paste. I'm going to undo that, and I'm just going to regular paste. Oops. And if I regular paste, which is Command V, it says violin here. And then you'd have to rename that, which is a pain in, it's stupid. Why do two, you just do this once. Boom, you're done. All right, so merge paste, Option and the letter M. Regular paste has the letter V. Okay, so I've got this here, and this is a flute, right? I want to start off with flute and oboe. So I'm going to return, and I'm going to merge paste that same bit. And then I'm going to go edit. So I've got my flute selected, oops, and I'm just going to use my grabber tool, and I'm just going to delete. And then I'm going to go to my oboe, and I'm going to delete. And now I'm going to take a listen. Yeah, Paul, I'm not sure about that with your PC. You'll have to look that up. I know my initials are PC, but I know nothing about PCs. I'm sorry, I can't help you, Paul. I apologize. Make sure Elaine will still talk to me. Okay, Kevin, great. All right, so the oboe's too loud. So we know that there are two ways to deal with the volume. So I'm going to open up the oboe, and I'm going to open up my edit lane, and I'm going to bring the MIDI velocity down, because even though I might have done MIDI work before, now I'm listening to it with the instrument I'm choosing. I need to do more work. So I'm going to bring that down further. Now, additionally, I want there to be a little breath between these two notes. So I've gone into slip mode, and I'm going to use my trim tool. I'm just going to take a little bit off there. So it's B, B, right? A little breath. All right. So let me show you what I did right there again. So I'm in grid mode, which is what we've been editing in. Now we're going to go to slip mode. That's this green one right here. Or if you've got this set up, right, it's F2. But you can always just click on that. I'm using the trimmer tool, and I'm just going to take a little bit off, a tiny bit. You know, it doesn't have to be here or on a grid, just a little bit in between. Now, it's still not working for me. So I'm going to go to my MIDI volume, and I'm going to use my pencil, and I'm going to draw in a little dynamics. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the flute. And I'm going to do the same thing here with this first note here. So these repeated notes, you just have to have a tiny little space there. I think it sounds better with... Yes, that's correct, Mark and Andrew. I use slip mode here. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. And I'm going to do some of the same stuff with the flute here. So I'm going to do it like a crescendo up to here, a little decrescendo, and I'm going to do a little bit of space. I'm just making some choices, and I'm going to listen, and maybe I don't like it, but I'm making some choices. And then a decrescendo there. And then you might have to play around with this. All right, so I like that. And then now, I want my bottom note here. I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to put that into the low strings. So I'm back at measure 1. I'm going to merge paste. All right, so that's what? That's way, yes, that's correct, Alan. Thank you. That's way too loud. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to bring down my velocity a little bit, right? So I'm just going to click and drag this way. All right, that's better, but I want to do some volume work. So I'm mixing as I'm working. You see, you're getting in the habit of listening to what you're doing as you're doing it, and you're getting the volumes balanced. Boom. As you're working on mixing and arranging at the same time. And that's how I work. You know, I'm mixing as I'm working because I want to hear what's going on. If I'm writing a film score as I'm working, what I'm hearing is pretty close to what it's going to sound like when it's done. There might be some fine tuning. There's always fine tuning. There's always work to be done, but you know, I'm like 90% of the way there as I'm writing. Okay, so same thing here. I'm going to make a choice. I'm just making some choices like this. So let's hear. And then what I might do is I might take the velocity on these last 4 notes and bring those up. So I get a nice phrase. And I might have to change the volume also. Yeah, let's do a crescendo there. And the other thing too, try not to have your MIDI volume be at 127 too often, right? You keep it down, save that. Instruments aren't always screaming at you. Okay, so another thing we can do. I'm going to copy this little phrase here. Well, I have to go back to grid mode and get all 4 of those notes. Now I'm at measure 2, beat 2, and 480. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to copy that with Command C. And then I'm going to go to my horn let's see what it sounds like if I put it on the horn. So I need to change my grid to eighth notes. So I'm going to pop it here, and that's going to be option M. All right, so let's listen to this. I'm going to bring the velocity up to make the horn a little louder. And that's a pretty nice orchestration, right? Now, when you're looking at these lines, you have to find the music within those lines, right? So, for example, I saw that there's this little fill line in here, so I doubled it with the French horn. I actually could just copy this and merge paste this in there and actually do something like this, where I dovetail, right? Where let's maybe the French horn doesn't start right. It might start after that. And bring the volume up. And then let's go to our MIDI volume, and the French horn might dovetail in a little bit like that. Right, something like that, maybe a little bit. Right, so that could work. There's so many ways of doing it. Now, I don't often. This is something else I wanted to mention to you. I don't typically work this way, but I'm teaching you how to. There's like a bunch of stuff I'm teaching you how to do with this method. You know, we're doing small little things at once. So, you know, entering notes just onto 2 tracks, then editing just 2 tracks instead of taking that and blowing it out into, like, you know, 15-piece orchestration. That becomes really hard to manage. So we're learning how to copy and paste clips, right? So, you know, this is a clip, this whole bit here, and these are smaller clips here. So we're learning how to copy and paste or merge paste that. And so there's a lot of techniques that I'm teaching you how to do here, and it all works together. There are people that write piano pieces and orchestrate from them. I'm not one of them, but this works for a teaching tutorial. Okay, so let's do this. Now, I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to change my orchestration the second time through.
You have to show your
Oh,
screen.
thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm at measure 3, and I'm going to go to the next 2 bars. So notice the thing about this, these are all like 2 or 3 bar phrases. So every 2 or 3 bars, you change your orchestration. Now, I have a small ensemble here. You know, graduate students, I'm going to give you a larger number, so you'll have more opportunities to change orchestrations on your piece. But right now, I'm going to copy, and I'm going to merge paste that into the high strings. Whoops. And I'm going to delete that. And I want to hear what something will sound like, right? So I'm going to merge paste this here in the oboe. Whoops, wrong place. And in the flute, right? And then I'm going to open both of these. So notice I'm holding the shift key down, and I'm clicking on both of these, and then I'm going to open up the MIDI editor, and I'm going to get rid of, and now my flute and oboe are down here, and then I'm going to make a little space between these repeated notes. So in other words, I'm editing 2 notes, 2 MIDI tracks at a time right now, but you don't have to do that. So yeah, that'll work. That could be an alto flute if I was writing it. So now I'm going to select from here all the way over to here. So that's measure 3, bar 2. Whoops. I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to paste that, merge paste that into the horn. And I'm going to double that with the harp. So you see, I can go through the whole score and work out just by copying and pasting and deleting. I can work out an arrangement. So I'm going to make an assignment right now. I mean, I have an assignment. There's one more other thing I want to teach you guys. So, but let me make the assignment. So graduate students, you're going to work out your arrangement for at least 12 tracks. Undergraduate music students, 6 to 8 tracks. Al, you would be a graduate student, Al. And then map majors, you're going to work yours out for 4 tracks. Map majors are people that are not music majors, and they picked an so I'm making an assignment for. Yes, all sounds from Expand 2. There's a reason for that, Chris, which I'm going to start getting into either next week or the week after. And I want everybody using the same software, and I'll show you why. All right. I know that you might have sounds that sound better. You can always swap them out after the assignment is over, but I have a method to my madness, and it's best if we're all on the same page. So let me copy this. I'm going to pop this up onto our Google Classroom. I'll adjust the assignment. And then two other things. Your instruments should be set up in a way that makes sense. So in other words, for all of you that are music majors, whether you're undergraduate or graduate, if you're looking at a score, winds, flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, then the brass. In an orchestral score, it's French horns, trumpets, trombones, but I like to do things by pitch, so I do trumpets, French horns, trombones, then percussion, then upper strings down to lower strings. So if you're using other instruments, try to keep instruments together in the track that are doing the same function. So in other words, if you've got a piano and an organ, they would be next to each other. If you've got a synthesizer and I don't know, 2 synthesizer sounds, they would be next to each other. So let me just show you guys how to navigate Expand 2 a little bit. One other thing I want to talk about. Now, yeah, there's 2 things to talk about. So, music, hey Pete, is there any? Yes, Ken. Yeah, actually, Ken, you can actually copy MIDI volume and MIDI expression and MIDI like modulation data, and you can paste that onto another track with MIDI notes, and it won't erase it. It'll just merge it in. It's really cool. Okay, so when you're listening to music, you're in Lefrak Hall, and you're watching the orchestra play, and the violins are over. The violins are over on the left. Let's see, my hand. The violins are over on the left, right? The cellos and basses are over on the right. The brass and the woodwinds are all set up around, and you've got like the percussion in the back and everything like that. Well, let's start mixing as we're working. We're going to make left, center, and right. So how do we do that? Well, I don't want you to touch the audio output over here. This panning control is here. For MIDI tracks, that doesn't work, and I will explain that, but just humor me and do it my way for this week, and then as we go on, I'll have the time to show you. Right here, you've got a pan control.
Change camera.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Whoops. Okay. So right here, you've got a pan control. So let's say I make my oboe a little bit to the left and my flute, my horn a little bit, I'll keep my horn in the center. And maybe I've got my flute a little bit to the right. And maybe my strings high a little bit to the left and my strings low a little bit to the right. And I'll leave the pizzicato right in the middle. And you won't hear this on Zoom, but you know, experiment around. Just move things around, but make sure it's balanced. I'm going to get more into this as we go on, but this is just, you know, I'm going to actually show diagrams and do a proper lesson on panning, but just get started with panning for next week. Okay. So let's take a look at Expand 2. So this is the GUI for Expand 2. And we're going to, one of the reasons why I want you to use Expand 2 is we're going to learn how to automate these controls and these controls. But for right now, the patch manager right here, if you go to factory default, you click there and there are folders, descriptive folders, and in each folder, there are hundreds, there's like 100 patches. So if you're going to use an acoustic piano, you can use Mini Grand, that's fine, but just either that or here. So pick any sounds. It takes time to learn where all these sounds are. Just do the best you can with that, and you'll pick your sounds. You know, some of these sounds are like, at this point in time, they're like C+. You know, they're 12 years ago, they were really good. Avid should really upgrade this. They sort of did with this UVI software that if you have a subscription you can download, but that doesn't really come with Pro Tools like this does. So it's really don't get me started on Avid. They're a really crappy company. As much as I love Pro Tools, the software, I don't like Avid, the company. All right, so we did a lot of work today. This was a proper class, right? We went over overtones, what makes up a sound, how different sounds have different combinations of overtones. We did some orchestration work where we listened to different combinations of wind sounds and how they sounded different. Then we listened to placement, right? Whether something was close to you or far away by the miking and how the room is affected, the sound of the room is affected. And then we did some work using the event operations menu, right? And we worked with quantizing and note duration. And then we did some MIDI editing using the edit lane, which is that area below the MIDI editor that you access with this triangle. You can actually have many lanes open over here. Just, you know, if there are, let's say that there are several lanes open like this, just there's a little minus circle with a minus right here. If you click on that, it just disappears, right? And we're just, you know, MIDI velocity and MIDI volume. So that's like a lot of stuff, but yet it's just the basics. It's just the foundation of what we're going to get into this semester. So everything, this will be the final version of this, and then we're moving on next week to another project. So try to get this done over the next week, please. Any questions? Yay, nay? I'll try to get the review video up in the next couple of days. All right. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. Hopefully we're going to get down to the end of the snow because I had to go out and shovel again this morning just before class started. I'm getting sick of shoveling. And you guys stay safe, and I will see you all next week. All right? Have a great day.
Thanks. Thanks, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go, Professor. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.